I've seen a lot in my 62 years. Crooked lawyers, desperate defendants, and neighbors who'd sell their own kids for a better parking spot. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the audacity of Karen Wentworth, the self-appointed queen of our sleepy little HOA. She thought she could bully my grandson, Ethan, out of his own damn house. Big mistake. If you've ever had someone try to steamroll you with a clipboard and a superiority complex, hit that like button and drop a comment with how you deal with a nosy neighbor like that. It all started on a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp fall day that makes you want to sit on the porch with a coffee and pretend the world isn't full of petty tyrants. I was at Ethan's place, a modest two-story he'd bought with his own money after years of grinding at a construction job. At 24, the kid had more sense than most men twice his age, saved every penny, fixed up the place himself, even planted a damn garden. I was proud, sipping my black coffee on his couch, when the doorbell rang like it was announcing the apocalypse. Ethan opened the door to find a certified letter, the kind that screams trouble before you even tear it open. He frowned, slicing it with a kitchen knife, and handed it to me. "Grandpa, what the hell is this?" he asked, his voice tight. I adjusted my glasses and read. It was from the HOA, signed by none other than Karen Wentworth herself, demanding Ethan vacate his property within 30 days for violations of community standards. The listed offenses? His truck parked in his own driveway, a non-compliant mailbox, and, get this, a garden gnome she deemed aesthetic blight. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Karen," I muttered, adjusting my glasses. I'd met her type before, power-hungry busybodies who treat an HOA presidency like it's the Supreme Court. Back when I was a circuit court judge, I'd seen her kind in the courtroom, clutching their pearls over zoning disputes or dog leashes. But this was personal. Ethan's house was his pride, his proof he'd made it without handouts. And now this woman, with her manicured lawn and her laminated rulebook, thought she could just evict him? I handed the letter back to Ethan, who was pacing like a caged animal. "Grandpa, this is bullshit. I've followed every rule. My truck's not even loud, and that gnome? It was a gift from Mom." His voice cracked, and I saw the kid I'd raised after his parents passed, fierce but vulnerable. I leaned back, calm as ever, because that's what 50 years of staring down liars teaches you. "Ethan," I said, "don't sweat it. We're not moving an inch. Karen's about to learn she picked the wrong fight." The first thing I did was pull out my old legal pad, force of habit from decades on the bench. I started jotting down the letter's claims, cross-referencing them with the HOA bylaws Ethan had tucked in a drawer. The violations were flimsy at best, the kind of nitpicking that wouldn't hold up in small claims court, let alone anywhere serious. The truck? Parked legally, well within the lines. The mailbox? Standard issue, maybe a little dented, but compliant. And the gnome? Hell, the bylaws didn't even mention garden decor. Karen was reaching, and I'd seen enough overreaching in my day to know what it smelled like, a power trip. But why Ethan? That's what gnawed at me. Our neighborhood, Willow Creek, was a quiet suburb, tidy lawns, kids on bikes, the usual. Ethan's house was one of the newer ones, bought at a steal after the previous owner foreclosed. Karen, who lived 3 doors down in a McMansion that screamed midlife crisis, had never warmed to him. Maybe it was his work boots, his calloused hands, or the fact that he didn't bow to her at HOA meetings. Or maybe, I thought, narrowing my eyes, it was something else. Something personal. I told Ethan to keep his cool and let me dig. "Don't confront her yet," I warned. "People like Karen thrive on reaction. Let her think she's winning." He nodded, reluctant, but he trusted me. Good kid. That night, I poured a scotch and started thinking like a judge again. Karen wasn't just flexing. She was calculating. Evicting someone from their own home isn't a casual threat. It takes planning, leverage, and a hell of a lot of arrogance. I'd seen her at HOA meetings, lording over the room with her gavel like she was auditioning for Judge Judy. But I wasn't just any neighbor. I'd spent 30 years dismantling liars in court, and I wasn't about to let some HOA dictator ruin my grandson's life. The next morning, I strolled over to the community mailbox, casual as you please, knowing Karen walked her yappy terrier at exactly 8 a.m. Sure enough, there she was, clipboard in hand, inspecting someone's recycling bin like it was a crime scene. "Morning, Karen," I called, my voice dripping with the kind of politeness that hides a knife. She turned, her smile as fake as her highlights. "Oh, Judge Thompson, I didn't know you were visiting Ethan." Her eyes flicked to his house, and I caught it, a flash of something. Guilt? Ambition? I filed it away. "Got a letter from you," I said, keeping my tone light. "Seems you've got some concerns about Ethan's place." She straightened, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "Well, rules are rules, Judge. We can't have the neighborhood looking like a junkyard." I smiled all teeth. "Funny, I thought his place looked better than most." "You sure this isn't personal?" Her face twitched, just for a second, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she had an agenda, and I was going to find out what it was. Karen's twitchy little smile stayed with me all day, like a bad taste you can't rinse out. I've spent enough years on the bench to know when someone's hiding something. Her eyes had that same glint I'd seen in defendants who thought they'd covered their tracks. If you've ever caught someone lying to your face and felt that itch to unravel their game, smash that like button, and tell me in the comments how you sniffed out their bullshit. Back at Ethan's, I didn't tell him about my run-in with Karen. The kid was already wound tight, and I needed him focused, not raging. Instead, I sipped my coffee and started thinking like the judge I used to be. Karen's letter wasn't just petty, it was aggressive, overstepping the HOA's authority by miles. Evicting a homeowner for a gnome and a parked truck? That wasn't rule enforcement, that was a vendetta. And vendettas always have roots. I started with the HOA bylaws, a dog-eared booklet Ethan had stuffed in a kitchen drawer. It was as dry as you'd expect, pages of jargon about fence heights and paint colors, but I'd slogged through worse in my day. The eviction clause was buried on page 52, and it was clear as day. The HOA could only initiate eviction proceedings for egregious and repeated violations after a formal vote by the board and a 60-day notice period. Karen's letter had no mention of a vote, and 30 days was half the required time. Sloppy. Arrogant. She was banking on Ethan being too young or too busy to fight back. But why go nuclear? Ethan was a good kid, kept his lawn mowed, paid his dues on time, didn't throw raggers. So I started poking around the neighborhood, casual-like, to see what I could dig up. I've always believed the best evidence comes from people who don't know they're giving it. First stop was Mrs. Callahan, the 80-year-old widow across the street who knew everyone's business. She was pruning her roses when I strolled up, leaning on my cane for effect. "Morning, Ellen," I said, tipping my hat. "You hear anything about this HOA nonsense with Ethan?" Her eyes lit up like I'd offered her a winning lottery ticket. "Oh, Judge Thompson, it's a disgrace," she said, snipping a rose stem with a vengeance. "That Karen's been after your grandson since he moved in. Says his truck lowers property values. But I heard her talking at the last meeting. She's got her eye on his lot for some developer friend of hers." Bingo. I kept my face neutral, nodding like it was just gossip, but my mind was racing. A developer? That smelled like money, and money always explains motive. I thanked Ellen and moved on, hitting up a few more neighbors over the next couple of days. The picture started coming together like a case I'd try in court. Karen wasn't just a control freak, she was connected. Rumor was, her husband, a slick real estate guy named Greg, had been cozying up to a developer who wanted to buy up lots in Willow Creek for a fancy condo project. Ethan's house, on a corner lot with a big backyard, was prime real estate. Karen's eviction stunt wasn't about gnomes. It was about flipping his property for a fat commission. I needed proof, though. Gossip's nice, but it doesn't hold up in a fight. So I did what any retired judge with too much time would do. I went digital. Ethan had given me access to the HOA's online portal a while back when he asked me to check his dues. I logged in, poking through meeting minutes and financial records. Most of it was mundane. Budget approvals, complaints about untrimmed hedges, but then I found it. A proposal from 6 months ago, buried in the miscellaneous section for the HOA to explore partnerships with local developers. The proposer? Karen Wentworth. Seconded by her husband, Greg. No vote recorded, no follow-up. Convenient. I cross-checked the dates. The proposal came a month after Ethan closed on his house. That's when Karen started nitpicking. First a warning about his mailbox, then a fine for unauthorized landscaping. Small stuff, but it was escalating. She was building a paper trail, probably hoping to scare him into selling before she played the eviction card. Clever, but not clever enough. I called up an old friend, Tom, who'd retired from the county clerk's office. He owed me a favor from back when I'd helped his kid beat a DUI rap. Tom, I said, you still got access to property records? He grumbled but promised to dig into any recent filings tied to Willow Creek. By the next afternoon, he called back. Your Karen's husband's been busy, he said. His name's on a preliminary contract with Crestview Development for 3 lots in your neighborhood. One of them's Ethan's address. I thanked him, my blood simmering. Karen wasn't just a busybody. She was a schemer, and her husband was in on it. That night, I sat Ethan down. Kid, I said, keeping my voice steady. Karen's not just after your gnome. She wants your house for a developer deal. His jaw dropped, then tightened. What the hell? She can't do that. I held up a hand. She thinks she can. But we're not rolling over. We're going to play her game better. Ethan looked at me, half hopeful, half pissed. What's the plan, Grandpa? I grinned, the kind of grin I used to save for prosecutors who thought they'd outsmarted me. First, we let her dig her own grave. Then we push her in. With the dirt I'd uncovered on Karen and her husband, I felt that old courtroom thrill creeping back, the kind that comes when you know you've got the upper hand but haven't shown your cards yet. People like her think they're untouchable, hiding behind rules they twist like pretzels. If you've ever laid a trap for a schemer and watched them walk right into it, hit that like button and share in the comments what your sweetest setup was. I didn't rush. Rushing is for amateurs, and at my age, I've learned patience is the sharpest weapon. Ethan wanted to storm over to Karen's McMansion and shove the evidence in her face, but I talked him down. Son, I said, pouring us both a scotch that evening. Confrontation without strategy is just noise. We're going to make her expose herself. He grumbled, but agreed, knowing I'd steered him right before. We spent the next few days acting normal. Ethan parked his truck as usual, even polished that damn gnome to spite her. Me? I started attending HOA meetings, something I'd avoided like the plague since retiring. The next meeting was in the community center, a bland room with folding chairs and a podium that Karen treated like a throne. I slipped in quietly, nodding to neighbors, my cane tapping softly on the linoleum. Karen was up front, banging her gavel with unnecessary force, her voice nasal and commanding as she droned about mulch standards. I sat in the back, observing. Greg, her husband, was there too, slouched in a chair, scrolling his phone, probably checking property listings. The air was thick with that suburban tension, the kind where everyone smiles, but nobody's happy. When the floor opened for comments, I raised my hand, calm as a summer lake. Ms. Wentworth, I said, standing slowly, I've got a question about eviction procedures. The room went quiet. Eyes darted. Karen's smile froze, but she recovered quick. Judge Thompson, always a pleasure. What's on your mind? I leaned on my cane, voice steady. Just clarifying. The bylaws require a board vote and 60 days notice for evictions, correct? And only for egregious violations. She nodded, too eagerly. Of course. We follow the rules to the letter. I smiled, all innocence. Good to know. Hypothetically, if someone issued a 30-day notice without a vote, that'd be improper. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's grip on the gavel tightened. Hypothetically, yes. But we don't have issues like that here. I sat down, but the seed was planted. Neighbors started whispering. Old Mrs. Callahan shot me a wink. Karen rushed through the rest of the agenda, her composure cracking just a bit. After the meeting, I lingered, chatting with folks. Heard about that developer deal? I asked one couple casually. They hadn't, but now they were curious. Word spreads fast in a place like Willow Creek, and I knew Karen would hear the rumors circling back. Good. Let her sweat. Back home, I ramped up the plan. I had Ethan ignore the letter officially. No response, no appeal. Instead, I drafted a formal complaint to the state's HOA Oversight Board, citing misuse of authority and potential conflicts of interest. I didn't file it yet. That was my ace. Meanwhile, Tom at the clerk's office sent me more goodies. Emails between Greg and Crestview Development, mentioning facilitating acquisition of Ethan's lot. One even referenced HOA assistance. Sloppy Greg. Real sloppy. Ethan was getting antsy, though. Grandpa, what if she escalates? Calls the cops or something? I chuckled, dark humor kicking in. Let her. I've got friends in blue from my judging days. Besides, we're turning the screws slowly. To build more tension, I suggested Ethan host a neighborhood barbecue. Nothing fancy, just burgers and beer in his backyard. Invite everyone, I said. Even Karen. He looked at me like I'd lost it. Why? I winked. Because declining looks suspicious, and accepting puts her on our turf. The barbecue was a hit. Neighbors showed up in droves, kids running around, laughter filling the air. Karen arrived late, Greg in tow, her smile plastered on like bad wallpaper. She had the gnome like it was a bomb. I greeted her warmly, handing her a plate. Glad you could make it, Karen. Ethan's place is looking great, huh? She muttered something about standards, but the neighbors were chatting her up about the meeting. What's this about developers? One asked. Karen's face paled. Greg shifted uncomfortably. I watched from the grill, flipping burgers, my calm exterior hiding the satisfaction bubbling inside. As the sun set, I pulled Ethan aside. See? She's unraveling. One more push, and she'll snap. He nodded, a grin breaking through. But I knew the real confrontation was coming. Karen wasn't done yet. She'd double down, maybe call an emergency meeting or send another letter. Fine by me. I'd be ready, with evidence stacked like cordwood. In my years on the bench, I'd learned that the best justice isn't loud. It's inevitable. And Karen's downfall was starting to feel just that. Karen's forced smile at the barbecue lingered in my mind like a bad omen, the kind that warns of storms brewing. I'd poked the hornet's nest, and sure enough, she was about to buzz back louder. In my long years judging cases, I'd learned that cornered folks don't slink away, they lash out. The day after the barbecue, Ethan found a new notice taped to his door, bright yellow like a hazard sign. Final warning. It blared, listing the same bogus violations, but now with a threat. Tow the truck within 48 hours or face fines escalating to liens on the property. Karen's signature was scrawled at the bottom, bold and underlined. Ethan stormed inside, waving it like a flag. Grandpa, this is war. She's coming after my truck now. I took the paper, scanning it with a judge's eye. No legal basis. HOA couldn't tow from private driveways without court order. But it was her move, meant to provoke. I poured us coffee, keeping steady. She's panicking, Ethan. Rumors are flying, and she's trying to reassert control. He paced, fists clenched. I want to rip it up and shove it. I cut him off gently. We don't react. We respond. Let's see what else she's got. I filed away the notice, adding it to my growing dossier. Then I made a call to another old contact, Sarah, a real estate attorney I'd mentored back in the day. Sarah, hypothetically, if an HOA president had a conflict of interest in a property dispute, she laughed, catching on quick. Hypothetically, that's grounds for removal. Maybe even lawsuits for fiduciary breach. Perfect. I had her draft a cease and desist template, just in case. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was stirring. Mrs. Callahan stopped by with cookies and more gossip. Karen's been calling emergency board meetings, she whispered, eyes wide. Says there's subversive elements undermining the HOA. I chuckled inwardly. Subversive? Me, a retired judge sipping tea? But it confirmed she was rattled. I encouraged the whispers, dropping hints at the local coffee shop about questionable dealings. Nothing slanderous, just enough to fan the flames. In court, I'd seen how doubt erodes authority. Karen's reign was cracking. Then came the real escalation. 2 days later, a tow truck rumbled up to Ethan's driveway at dawn. I was there early, helping with his garden, when we heard the engine. Ethan bolted out, me close behind. The driver, a burly guy in overalls, was hooking up Ethan's truck. What the hell? Ethan yelled. The driver shrugged. HOA order. Violations. Karen stood across the street, arms crossed, smirking like she'd won. Neighbors peeked from windows, phones out. Good. Witnesses. I stepped forward, cane in hand, voice calm but carrying. Son, you might want to unhook that. This is private property, and that order's invalid. The driver hesitated, glancing at Karen. She marched over, clipboard flapping. Judge Thompson, this doesn't concern you. Ethan's in violation. I held up a hand. Actually, it does. I'm his legal advisor now. Her eyes narrowed. You're retired. I smiled, sarcasm dripping. Retired, not expired. And I know the law better than your rulebook. Ethan filmed it all on his phone, smart kid. The driver, sensing trouble, backed off. I don't want no legal mess, he muttered, unhooking the chains. Karen fumed, face red as a beet. This isn't over. The board will hear about this insubordination. She stormed away, Greg pulling up in his SUV to whisk her off. As they drove past, I caught Greg's eye, nervous, avoiding mine. The neighbors applauded quietly. One even shouted, "Way to go, Judge!" Tension was peaking, the air electric with anticipation. That night, I reviewed the video with Ethan. This is gold, I said. Attempted theft, essentially. We can use it. He nodded, fire in his eyes. But I warned him, she'll go for broke now. Maybe a special meeting to push the eviction. Sure enough, invites hit mailboxes the next day. An emergency HOA assembly to address ongoing compliance issues. It was her endgame, rallying loyalists to vote Ethan out. Fine. I'd be there, evidence in tow. In my judging days, I dismantled bigger schemes than this. Karen thought she was the law here, but she was about to learn, justice doesn't bow to bullies. The emergency HOA meeting loomed like a thunderhead on the horizon, heavy with the promise of reckoning. Karen had called it to rally her troops, but I saw it as her final misstep, the stage where her house of cards would tumble. In my decades on the bench, I'd presided over trials where the guilty thought they could bluster their way out. Karen was no different, just with a gavel instead of a guilty plea. If you've ever sat in a room where truth finally corners a liar, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments about your most satisfying takedown. The community center was packed that evening, folding chairs scraping as neighbors filed in, murmuring about the drama. Word had spread like wildfire, thanks to my subtle nudges, and folks were curious, some even hostile toward Karen's heavy-handed tactics. Ethan and I arrived early, him in his work boots, me in my old courtroom suit, pressed and sharp. I carried a briefcase, unassuming but loaded with ammunition, printed emails, property records, the invalid notices, and that video of the tow truck fiasco. Karen was at the podium, Greg beside her, both looking strained. She banged the gavel, calling order, her voice pitched high with false authority. Fellow residents, she began, we're here to address severe compliance issues threatening our community's integrity. Specifically, the property at 142 Willow Lane, owned by Ethan Thompson, has repeatedly violated bylaws, necessitating eviction proceedings. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan tensed beside me, but I placed a hand on his arm. Wait, I whispered. Karen droned on, listing the violations with dramatic flair, projecting slides of his truck and gnome like they were Exhibit A in a murder trial. Sarcasm bubbled in me. Lady, I've seen real crimes. Your power trip doesn't impress. When she opened the floor, hands shot up. Mrs. Callahan went first, bless her. Karen, what about the bylaws requiring a vote? In 60 days. Karen waved it off. This is an emergency. The board agrees. But a board member piped up, hesitant. We didn't vote on this. Murmurs grew. Karen's face tightened, glancing at Greg, who shrugged helplessly. That's when I stood, slow and deliberate, cane in hand. The room hushed. Folks knew my history, even if Karen pretended not to. Ms. Wentworth, I said, voice carrying like it did in court. Before you proceed, perhaps we should discuss conflicts of interest. She blinked, gavel mid-swing. What are you implying, Judge Thompson? I smiled, opening my briefcase. Not implying, stating. Your husband, Greg, has a pending deal with Crestview Development to acquire several lots here, including Ethan's. And you've used your position to facilitate that by fabricating violations. The room erupted in whispers. I passed copies of the emails and contracts to the board, projecting the video on my laptop for all to see. The tow truck, her smirking face. Karen spluttered, red-faced. "This is outrageous. Those are private documents. How did you?" I cut in, calm as ever. "Public records and a little diligence, Karen. As a retired judge, I know a thing or two about due process. This isn't just improper. It's potentially fraudulent. Misusing HOA authority for personal gain? That's a breach of fiduciary duty, grounds for lawsuits, maybe even criminal charges." Greg bolted upright, protesting, but the crowd was turning. Neighbors shouted questions. "Is this true? You're selling us out?" She banged the gavel frantically. "Order. This meeting is about violations, not baseless accusations." But it was too late. A motion came from the floor to remove Karen as president. Seconded immediately. The vote was swift, lopsided against her. She stood there, clipboard trembling, as her empire crumbled. I watched with quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from justice served cold. Ethan squeezed my shoulder, whispering, "Grandpa, you're a legend." But we weren't done yet. The real revenge was just beginning, with consequences that would hit her where it hurt. The echoes of that HOA meeting still rang in my ears like the final gavel in a long trial, sealing Karen's fate with the weight of her own arrogance. I'd watched empires fall from the bench, but seeing her crumble in a room full of folding chairs, that was poetic justice. If you've ever tasted the sweet chill of revenge after a long build-up, hit that like button and share in the comments how you served yours. With Karen stripped of her presidency, the board wasted no time electing a new one, a sensible neighbor who'd long chafed under her rule. But I wasn't content with just dethroning her. Bullies like Karen need to feel the sting to learn. The next morning, I filed the formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Board, attaching every scrap of evidence. The emails, the invalid notices, the video. Sarah, my attorney friend, helped polish it into a damning document, highlighting fiduciary breaches and potential fraud. "This could lead to fines, even disbarment from future HOA roles," she said. I nodded, signing with a flourish. "Good. Let her clipboard collect dust." Word spread fast. Neighbors texted. The local paper picked up a blurb about HOA scandal in Willow Creek. Karen's McMansion went quiet. Curtains drawn. No more dog walks at 8 a.m. Greg's SUV vanished for days, probably hiding from the fallout. But I upped the ante. I tipped off Crestview Development anonymously, sending copies of the contracts with notes on the unethical facilitation. Their response was swift. Deal canceled, citing reputational risks. Greg's real estate listings dried up overnight. Whispers said clients were jumping ship, wary of his shady tactics. For the shock factor, I orchestrated a public reveal at the next community picnic. Nothing explosive, just strategic. Ethan and I set up a booth with HOA reform flyers, subtly outlining the scheme without naming names outright. But folks knew. Karen showed up, dragged by habit or denial, her face gaunt. When a neighbor confronted her, "Was it all for money, Karen?" she snapped, denying everything in a shrill tirade. It backfired spectacularly. Phones captured it, viral in our little suburb. Social isolation hit hard. Invites stopped. Friends ghosted. Her yappy terrier was her only company now. Ethan filed a civil suit for harassment and defamation, seeking damages for the stress and attempted towing. With my testimony, it was a slam dunk. The settlement? Modest, but enough to cover legal fees and a new truck upgrade. Karen and Greg shelled out, their savings dented. Rumors flew of divorce papers. Greg moved out weeks later, tail between his legs. The developer deal's collapse cost them a six-figure commission. Poetic, considering that's what started it all. As for us, Ethan thrived. With the cloud lifted, he expanded his garden, hosted more barbecues, even ran for the new HOA board, and won. Me? I stuck around longer, enjoying retirement with purpose. Mornings on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood heal. I'd seen enough betrayal in court to know revenge isn't always pretty, but damn if it isn't satisfying when earned. In the end, Karen learned the hard way. Don't mess with family, especially when Grandpa's got a judge's gavel in his blood. Willow Creek was quieter now, rules fair, no more tyrants. And that gnome? Still standing proud, a little monument to justice. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.